Introducing aPriori.
So Stan Croker, work with AGCO, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Been with AGCO now for 18 years, and so a lot of that with engineering systems administration. So I would like to talk to you today about AGCO, kind of what it is and which piece of AGCO we're going to talk about, how AGCO uses aPriori today, and then where we're going forward. So AGCO is a farmer-focused company that is building solutions to sustainably feed our world. We've had a couple of other presentations that have talked about the number of people and how we feed all these people, and that's entirely what we do. So we build a full line of ag equipment. We support planting the seeds, taking care of the shoots, harvesting the crop, storing and conditioning that crop, and then using the crop to feed, nourish, and support animals, livestock. And in addition to that, we're coming out with a number of smart, innovative farming solutions, so software and other tools that help the farmers produce the crop. I do want to take just a minute, and if you look in the top left corner, we've got the grain bins. The group that we're going to talk about today builds these grain bin systems. And so the grain bins are usually kind of out of a catalog. You pick which one you want. How they're situated on the site, how tall they are, how far apart they are, the size of the tower in the back. These are pieces that are all then engineered or designed to order for that particular job. And so those are the pieces that we're going to be talking about that our engineers are working on. So, okay. Back within AGCO, in our engineering groups, we've got really two different groups. We've got a vehicle group, which covers the tractors and everything with wheels or that you pull behind a tractor. And then we've got the grain and protein group. The GSI division is one piece of that grain and protein group. And that's the piece of AGCO that we're talking about. But this applies really across all of AGCO, and we've got bits of this in other places too. So I was introduced to aPriori back in '07. I went to a small little user group meeting in Salina, Kansas, and back when it was still Pro Engineer. And we saw a little presentation for aPriori. And we started work initially at Heston, replacing some of the spreadsheets that we have in place in the manufacturing engineering world. Every manufacturing engineer had their own spreadsheet. They had their own way of doing it, and so typically if the same manufacturing engineer would cost the part again and again, he would get the same answer, but the same part between me and Sam, you would get a different answer. So what aPriori brought to the table was that we could now do things in a similar way, and we could take the information that these manufacturing engineers had and put it into the digital factory. In '09, we went kind of larger scale with this, and we went across the entirety of AGCO. We went into the manufacturing plant in Minnesota, and we started to do some should cost work down in Brazil. We do some of the same kind of should cost work in Italy and across the world at our different sites. So today we have about 120 licenses. I want to say about 60 of those, I think, are like the AP Pro, and the rest are designer users. And then, interesting story, so GSI had a project that started actually in accounting. So the accountants and the controllers within GSI were looking at their factory standards. So the factory standards. So in the business system, in your MRP system, you've got a part that gets planned. The part goes to this work center for this many seconds, and then to this work center for so many seconds, and that's, I mean, it's what aPriori talks about, the different routings and the cycle time. Well, the cycle times didn't match up with what was happening on the shop floor. So there wasn't a real good understanding in the accounting side of how many hours of labor do I have in my factory right now. And so accounting said, hey, we need to get a handle on this, and they started a project. That project then ended up winnowing down a number of different tools to where aPriori was one of the tools that they were looking at. At that time, they didn't realize that AGCO actually owned aPriori. And through some conversations, I got in touch with them and we started actually building the aPriori work in grain and protein. So it's interesting that AGCO has come now twice through 2 different routes to aPriori. So what is our process to build a digital factory? Well, the first thing that we do is we take and we walk through the factory. So what are the machines that we have on the shop floor? What is the process that the parts go through to get manufactured? And then it's useful to take a walk through the ERP system, because it could be that you have additional work centers that are getting time that you need to account for. So it could be that you've got somebody that takes the parts off the machine and puts them on a pallet, and then every 10 parts, they run a band around those. Well, as a manufacturing person, you really need to account for that time to put the band around those 10. And so you need to just be aware of that kind of stuff so that you can put it into the process. So we do this for each of the different process groups. We do it for sheet metal, for the bar and tube stuff, for all of the different process groups. And then we take that work, that spreadsheets, it's going to be video studies, it's going to be time studies, and we take that to our expert services team and the input spreadsheets, and we take and we start to configure the digital factory. Well, what it amounts to then is that you have a piece part that you have video of on the shop floor. So they take, let's just take a laser and brake part. You take the sheet of steel, you laser out your part, and you're capturing how long it takes to laser that part out. You take it to the brake, you break it. Now you can take that same part in aPriori and you can run it through the same process, and you should be getting answers that are the same. And that's where the configuration comes in to make sure that you're getting the right cycle time as what happens on the shop floor. Because what we want with our digital factory is we want to actually capture the actual number of hours that happen on the shop floor. So once we do that, we run through some tests, we make sure that all the cases are working, we roll this out to production. Inevitably, on the production side, you're going to find a few things that you didn't actually run through, some corner cases, and so you just do this iteratively. Here's an example of the spreadsheet tool that we use to kind of keep track of all this stuff. Across the top are the different factories. So Assumption, Taylorville, Paris, these are all factories in Illinois. As you go down the rows, these are the different machines or processes on the shop floor that we're accounting for. Right, so in Assumption, we've got a lot of green boxes and check marks. These are all processes that are fully vetted and tested out and are in production. If you look at the China JV column, there's a factory that we're just getting started with, identifying what they have on the shop floor, and haven't even really started with the calibration yet. So this is what we're continuing to do. As we get one finished up, we take those resources and move them on to the next factory. So what do we get when we're done with all of this? As I said before, we had a set of spreadsheet files and no real auditable trail for how we got to a part cost. Very much a black box. So somebody would say this part is going to cost $12, and that's what it cost. With aPriori, we have a common costing platform that's controlled. We have a formal process to buy off on that configuration and a formal acceptance. So there's a lot of due process around making that happen. It's consistent, so I can run the part today, I can run it tomorrow, I can have somebody else run the same part, and I'm going to get the same answer. It's accessible to users around the world. All of our users come into the same aPriori database, and so anybody can cost a part in Assumption. And then bulk costing, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but it also allows us to do some bulk costing and some large-scale automation with this. And I wanted to capture this one quote from Scott. He was the project manager for getting aPriori in place. And he says that the rigor that his team has put in play around this gives us a controlled means to analyze part cost better than before we had aPriori. Okay, so the next steps on the manufacturing engineering side, we continue to move to new sites, and we're also expanding into some of the global sites. Kind of what we're doing is as we bring Windchill and Creo into a site, we also bring in aPriori and take and map the factory and build those capabilities up at the same time. Some of the challenges that we've had have to do not so much with the process of building the digital factory, but very much with the process of how do you then get this new information into the business with the least disruption possible. So there are, in the manufacturing world, you've got KPIs tied around how your factory is performing. Are you meeting or exceeding the time standards? And all of these pieces are in place to help drive the manufacturing side of the business. Moving a new set of time standards in place changes all of that. And so that needs to be something that accounting is very much a part of, that the controller is very much a part of. And what we've done is, back to the bulk costing. So if we're going to put in place the cost process for, let's say, sheet metal, and we're going to go across the brakes and the lasers, we will use bulk costing to then take and recost all of the parts that go across those machines. And so then we can have a whole new set of time standards that we take and put in place. And then from that point forward, most likely the end of the year, that point forward, all of the KPIs would be based on those numbers, and you don't have this combination of old style costing and aPriori costing. So let's move on to design engineering. And we've had a couple of people already talk about how difficult it is to get design engineers to change the way they work, to get excited about new tools. And we have the same kind of problem. This design to order and this engineer to order product process, one of the things that it means is that we have product costs at a pretty high level. So I might have a project cost for my ladders, but I'm not going to have a target cost for the piece of the ladder that connects from the top of the grain bin over to the gantry, the walkway that goes across the other side. I just don't have that level of detail. So the engineer, if he runs aPriori on his part and gets a cost of $12, it's $12. Is that high? Is that low? He doesn't know. And more interestingly, I think, I don't know that it matters that he knows. The important thing is to get the product released and to production so that you can hit the delivery date, because that's a key part of what the whole order process is, especially in this design to build, because the whole site is bid as a project. So what we're really going to focus the engineers on is what's the design for manufacturing score. The idea being that if you've got a medium or a high score, it's really a part that you need to look at. If you've got a low score part, just let it go. Move on to the next one, because one of your projects, one of the parts you put together is going to be a medium or a high score, and you can put your effort there and bring that cost down, which will bring down the overall cost. We also are having them work with some of the early design questions. Do I do a casting? Do I do a weldment? Do I do one complex piece of sheet metal with 4 or 5 different bends, all different directions? Or do I do very simple sheet metal parts and bolt them all together or weld them together? Those kinds of delta cost experiments, and I like the way that the Caresoft guy talked about it yesterday, speaking of it as a delta cost, that kind of question then can play into where they go with the design. So they're looking at that very early in the project, make those decisions, so then you can head off down the road. So this last bullet point about design engineering being involved now adds an additional piece of information here, because before design engineering is involved, when manufacturing engineering loads the parts and runs the parts, they have to go to Windchill, get the parts, and load them in. By having design engineering actually part of the process, that loading process takes place ahead of them, and we've actually taken some time out of the manufacturing engineering process. So The thing that we're doing to make it easiest for our engineers is to use AP Generate. So from Windchill itself, in the actions menu that you see there, in Windchill from the Creo file, we can do actions, aPriori costing job. It brings up the window that asks for what process is it, which VPE do I use. I enter some information about annual quantities, and then submit the job, and the engineer can now go on to the next part. What's happened is that aPriori has taken that part in the background and will cost it using that information, and then send an email back to the engineer, which you see in the bottom corner here on the right side, giving him a score for the DFM, giving him a cost, and letting him know whether it was completely costed successfully or if there were issues with the costing process. So in a very real sense, what we're hoping to do here, and we've done this some already, but hoping to spread throughout the rest of the organization, even beyond GSI, is to automate the costing process, identify which ones of the parts are either incomplete costs or are high DFM risks, and focus on those parts, and let our engineers let the rest of them go through. So now we're automating that cost process really through very little effort on the engineer's part. So again, just to kind of finish up, these digital factories, we leverage them globally. There's one system around the world. And so we've got roll forming equipment and assumption. If we have parts that we can design for roll forming at another place, we can quote that work essentially at assumption and see how that would work, which allows us to then take and use some design concepts from one place and put them in another place. Using the design for manufacturing capabilities, we can focus our designs on what our factories can do. And so our digital factories now are really driving our design. That is it.
aPriori, making profitability and sustainability a reality for a better world.